Alright, so this video is going to be a 2-in-1, bringing back a bit of a past video, but also explaining all of the stats in the game. I know a lot of people are confused, especially about attack and magic attack, but even further than that, I know a lot of you guys don't really understand all the bottom stats like penetration, endurance, damage resistance, and accuracy especially. So I like to class these into 4 groups: the attack to HP group, the crit group, the penetration and endurance group, and then the damage resistance plus the accuracy group. So that's how we're going to be tackling this, all the stats, right? So we're going to start with attack to HP, just our main stats, our main 4 stats, the stats that everyone knows how they work for the most part, or at least how defense and HP work. So obviously defense makes you take less damage, HP is the amount of HP you have, and once you get to 0 you die. All right, that we're clear about. Now for attack and magic attack, every unit has a built-in amount of either equal more attack or more magic attack into them. Now usually the ones with more attack are the ones who use swords, anything physical, right? So it's more of a physical attack. And then magic attack would be someone like Lotus, Mimosa, Fuego, right, who use actual magic. And obviously someone like Asta has only physical attack because he has, well, no magic. And then interestingly enough, Langris has no physical attack in the future, Langris, because he only has magic, which I don't remember why that is, but y'all let me know in the comments why exactly. So usually the stat that's higher, usually you're going to want to build more because of things like buffs. So like someone like William, for example, which we're going to talk about later, has, oh, I don't have William, it's true on this account. Someone like William has an attack buff that's very high, so that's one of the reasons. Now next up, let's go to the crit group. We'll talk about accuracy when we talk about damage resistance. So obviously, more crit rate means you'll have a higher chance to crit, and then more crit damage means the crit is going to be doing more damage. Then the crit resistance is basically going to lower the crit rate by that amount. So technically 1.27% is going to be lowering the crit resistance. I think this is pretty self-explanatory also. Now, obviously, speed is how quick you are and how quick you're going to be at the start of a battle. Now, depending on how quick your speed is, including buffs and debuffs, it's going to either make it so that you're going to fill up your mobility gauge quicker or slower, right? So if you do get a speed buff, then you're going to be able to fill up your mobility gauge quicker, which will then make you attack first. Now, let's say 2 people have the same mobility, and then one gets a speed buff, then the person who gets the buff will be going next. Now, let's say someone already has more speed, but then, someone has more mobility, and then someone has just less mobility but the same speed, and they get buffed. It is very possible that the person with more mobility, even though after the buff on the other person has less speed, will be going first because the mobility is already higher. So it's really about getting that mobility first to 100%. Speed buffs and debuffs are very good because of the fact that it helps over time to build up your mobility gauge. So that is very, very good. Now, let's talk about penetration and endurance. So endurance is basically the extra damage resulting from the attacker's penetration stat is reduced. So penetration does extra damage, and there's 2 different types of penetration. There's penetration and there's defense penetration. Normal penetration does ignore a portion of the target's defense when you do the damage, but the amount ignored will be reduced to a certain extent by the endurance stat. Then defense penetration not only pierces defense, but also cannot be affected by endurance. So defense pen is a better version of penetration, right? Because you go through not only endurance, but also into the defense. So penetration is a pretty important skill and a good like gear set to definitely go up with and definitely build. So next up, let's talk about the damage, resistance, and accuracy, okay? This one I think is the most confusing because obviously even for like penetration, you don't know how much you actually will need, right? You don't know because they don't really tell you how exactly it works. So it kind of sucks, but that's just the nuances of this game. So damage resistance basically is the thing that lets you block. And it's basically the higher you have it, the more chance you will have. I'm pretty sure this is how it works. The more chance you will have to actually block a hit and reduce up to 30% of damage. Because when you block a hit, it will make it so that you block up to 30% of damage. Now, this could also, if you do block, it will be able to stop crits, which is very interesting. Now, accuracy is the stat that is going to be going through the blocks, blocks could not only make it so you take reduced damage, but that also inevitably means that you're not getting the crit because you blocked the damage, right? Which is why something like total defense is very strong. So accuracy is the thing that's going to be going through the damage reduction from the damage resistance based on the accuracy. So that is basically all of the stats, right? So remember, we have the 4 categories: the basic stats, the crit stats, the endurance and pen stats, and then the damage resistance stats. So that's how we build it. Damage resistance plus accuracy, endurance plus pen, crit, 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 and then HP to attack. And then speed is just there because speed, right? So this is how you would build all of the stats. Now, going over to the buffs. This is something I'll explain here and then give actual examples. If you want to check all of this out, it is in battle, but 4 buffs, okay? 4 buffs. If we go to buff types, let's talk about all the buffs, and then the debuffs kind of follow suit to being the exact opposite. Increased attack. What do you think decreased attack does, right? So like that's basically how it works. Now, the thing with buffs is you cannot stack the same buff, but if they have different names, then yes, you could stack it. Because let's say, for example, William has a damage reduction buff on his ult. Then Season 6 Charlotte also has a damage reduction buff, but the title is different. Williams is called Fortify, where Charlotte's is called damage reduction, so you could stack those 2 buffs. But you cannot stack 2 attack buffs, and if you reapply a buff, it has to be a higher level if there's already a buff on them. You cannot, okay, so there's only 2 ways you could really reapply a buff. 1, it's the same buff and then it's going to reset the turns. Or 2, it's going to be a higher level buff which basically switches place. If it's a lower level skill, then you cannot set it. It's going to, if you have a level 3 attack buff, okay, that lasts 1 last turn, or a level 2 attack buff that lasts 2 turns that you're trying to apply, the level 3 attack buff will win even if it has 1 turn left. That is to note. Now, what you are able to do too for stats is definitely stack attack and all attack. All attack increases attack and magic attack to the same amount. So this is the only way to really technically stack the attack or magic attack, to where the attack and all attack will kind of like multiplicatively buff off of each other. Then defense is going to increase a certain amount, accuracy, penetration, and remember, defense pen, it's better to increase defense penetration. Then increasing endurance will also let you just like save more. It's basically like another defense, right? Then the crits, basically the same thing. Now, there are certain buffs that you will see. If it doesn't say for 2 turns or for 3 turns, the amount of turns that the buff is active or debuff, then it means it's just during the attack. It's just during the attack that. Now, if we go to the starting to get to the interesting ones, it starts at weapon enhancement. Weapon enhancement is going to increase the amount of damage by a fixed amount, and fortify is going to reduce the amount of damage by a fixed amount, and the most damage reduction you could have at the end is 90%. Then the increased amount of HP recovery received, basically like let's say you're doing 10k and you have 50%, that's going to do 15k by the end. Now crit res, obviously it's basically just like reducing the crit rate of the enemy in a way, right? Then increased favored damage dealt is going to be increasing the type advantage damage that you're doing, and then increased boss damage is going to be against something like raids, Hall of Illusions bosses, right? The last stages of the memory hall, and some story bosses essentially. Then we go to some here, and really the only one that I want to talk about, I mean there's not much else to talk about if we're really going into the buffs, because I mean let's just go to it, I guess. So there's increased class damage dealt, then reduced class damage dealt, but we don't have anything like that yet. Now we do also not have increased skill damage dealt, right? So these are all things that are not there yet, and unfavored damage we don't have either. So that's interesting. Now increased SP obviously is going to increase your skill points, and then reduced skill cooldown we do have. Total defense is going to basically make it so that the damage resistance stat will be activated and you will get the block, right? Debuff removal will remove debuffs, and then extended buff duration will, guess what guys? Guess what? Extend your buff duration. Now increased mobility is probably one of the strongest things in the game, especially you see it on someone like Voltos, where you start off at 80% stamina and he gives 20%, so it makes you attack next because he brings you up to 100%. Now, we have invulnerability in the game, and the thing is with invulnerability, the only time we have it, it was basically for 3 character turns. So it's not 3 full turns, it's 3 turns between all the units in the game, all the units in the match, right? So like, let's say you have a Veto, Yami, and then an Asta. If you proc it for Veto attacks, that's 1 turn off. Yami attacks, that's 1 turn off. Asta attacks, then you don't have the invulnerability anymore. Now, barrier, you are able to stack barriers, so you can have like a 1 million barrier if you really somehow get to that point. And protection is basically you can't target them, so that one is pretty good. Now immortality, they could be at 100% HP, and you could target them, get them down to 1, and they will not die, okay? So that's basically how it works. And then the rest are like most of all self-explanatory. And then yeah, we have basically the exact opposite. The only wording that's a bit different is weapon disarm, which is the opposite of weapon enhancement. Okay, where it's basically reducing the amount of damage that the enemy's doing. And then concentrated attack, basically you're getting a guaranteed crit for that. And then yeah, the only things that could really go through anything is like taunts, reduce recovery HP received, silence, and that's basically the big three. Now there's status ailment immunity, for which is for stuns. There's DLT immunity, which is for DLTs. Then there's debuff immunity, which is for pretty much everything but the three I mentioned right before. So I hope that was helpful. The last got a bit repetitive, but it is what it is. I just wanted to make sure, because I know some people are still gonna end up messing up on certain things. So you know, just why not explain it, right? I hope this video was helpful. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.